Hello and welcome to the broadcast, everybody. My name is Igor Demyanov. I'm working as a principal developer at Proactive. Have been working with the cloud services and Microsoft 365. And today I have my colleague Abdel with me, who is an expert in today's topic.
Expert, okay.
And
at least I have some knowledge.
We're going to talk about how to securely deploy to the cloud with Azure DevOps.
Yeah, totally. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our broadcast here. My name is Abdurrahman. I work as a solution architect with Proactive. I'm mainly focused at Azure technologies and software development, building integration and migration projects with our customers. I'm delighted today to speak about a topic that is close to our hearts, I guess, and we usually work with it that often, so it's definitely something that we would like to share today. Yes, so let's jump into the agenda. I have some slides here. Yeah, basically we will be speaking about deploying to cloud services using Azure DevOps. How do we make sure of our governance, and we have like a governance process, segregation of duties, who have access to our prod environments in the cloud. How do we establish this kind of infrastructure to make deployments from Azure DevOps to the cloud, and general discussions about how do we have like an approval and a flow for doing the release. So this is basically a discussion we will take, and I guess it's one of the first topics we touch base on with the customers. Do you agree, Igor?
I agree.
Yeah.
So we're going to cover some of the processes today, which are very important, and it's important to consider them from the beginning of the project.
Yes.
To define the scope and set some expectations and agree within the team and within the project how to structure those things.
Totally. I agree. I mean, it is one of the first things that we should think about when we start a migration or a new cloud solution, because usually there is a process and for deploying on-premise, and usually for customers, they're familiar with the process, they are happy with it, they know how to work with it. Usually you have like a server or an assistant admin who takes over the responsibility of releasing and doing the deployments. When in the cloud, customers are really sometimes worried about, do we keep our same structure? Do we keep what kind of skills do we need? How do we make sure that we have a secure deployments and we don't just leak or deploy packages or malicious packages to our environments? So yes, for that I created this reference diagram, which we would be speaking a lot along the presentation today. So I tried to kind of have a reference diagram to compare the old way of working via the cloud and the cloud technologies. So if we look at the typical on-premise environments, usually you would have a server. This server would contain all your solutions hosted on that server, and then you will have the system admin, and I gave him the king figure. I like the system admin. He usually have all the control, he have full access to the system, to the server, and he knows what he's doing, and he have responsibility. He's usually the go-to guy, and he's usually like the trusted, yeah, I didn't want to say bottleneck, but at least the trusted advisor. The system admin have all access to all the credentials, and using those credentials, he can access the different servers using those secrets. So the system admin will take the package, use the secrets and credentials to log into the server and deploy to this environment. This is a typical on-premise. This is the old story. This is how we used to work.
Worked great for many years, right?
Yeah.
So why to change?
I agree. Well, it is a new era, I would say, and you don't have to rely on a specific people. You can always have the tooling around it, and plus, I guess the system admin in the old days used to have like a log and a history of all the packages he deployed. All that can come for free. You have audit logs, you have history, you have approvals, you have packaging systems. All that comes for free if you start using Azure DevOps. And complementing that with Azure services, it's a great match. They can work very well together, and it gives you a lot of powers. And of course, with those powers, there is also governance and security in it.
Exactly. One thing is it's not exactly free. It costs a bit,
Yeah, you
but
have subscriptions. Yeah,
but
totally,
but
totally.
yes, I
I
agree.
would say on-prem servers would cost much more.
So, yes. So
Yeah.
basically, actually, what you're saying that we can collect different dots in one place, and we can have a
Yes.
full solution to manage
Yeah.
all our internal processes for developing application, making specification,
Yeah.
and releasing specification securely to the various environments.
Exactly.
Sounds
As you
great.
said, it's one place that contains it all. Won't it be nice to have both your code, your backlog, your release pipelines, and your packages and your environments all defined in one place, and you have a dashboard to maintain it all?
Yes.
That's what Azure DevOps comes with. Okay, so let's back to the reference diagram. If we look into the right side, then I'm trying to map a one-to-one component between what we had on premise to what we have today in the cloud. So for the servers, that's obviously now Azure. Your code and your solutions are utilizing the Azure services, and it's hosted inside Azure Cloud. So this is the mapper for the on-premise servers. As for the system admins, we would still keep the system admins. There will still be a person who is responsible for the cloud, but instead he will rely on the toolings, and that would be Azure DevOps. Instead of having his own logs, instead of deploying his own packages, all that will happen through Azure DevOps. As for credentials, for someone to log in, to be able to log into Azure, we didn't want to rely on a system account. We didn't want to rely on a specific people. So for that, Microsoft have give us what we call SPN, or a service principal. The service principal act as it's basically an application in Active Directory that you can create, and this application would give you access to the resources you need. And of course, it's handled and maintained through your admin in the tenant. This application, not anyone can create. It's specific people based on your organization policies and configurations. Specific people would be able to create those credentials or secrets or as service principals and give them access to the right resources. And then finally, your package would be, since we're using Azure, it could be an ARM template or a binaries of an Azure function and so on. So this is our reference diagram, and what we will do today is that we will go through each of those components and show them as a demo in our portal through Azure and Azure DevOps, and show how to create them and how to utilize them to guarantee a secure deployment to Azure Cloud. I think we have, using Livestorm, you can ask any questions meanwhile, and Igor would be able to say that, right?
Yes,
Yes.
I will be able to see them.
Yeah.
So if we just sum up about the diagram, when we have all this on-prem versus cloud, this is normally referred as lift and shift, right? So you take something that you have on premises and you would like to move this to the cloud. And what you're actually doing with this as well, that you are kind of shifting a bit of focus from infrastructure, and you actually will have more time on developing your application and not focusing that much on the number of servers, how to patch them, how to do keep them updated, and so on.
Yeah. Well, the lift of shift, of course, is a concept that you can take the on-premise environment,
Yeah.
but you can relate to it. Yes, you can map to it, and it's a different. It's not a typical one-to-one lift and shift, but
Yeah.
it is some kind of a mapper. Yes, I agree.
Yes.
Perfect. So let me jump in to taking the first component, which is Azure DevOps. Let me just stop the presentation so you see my screen. So the first thing we will speak about is the service principal, which is the credentials in the old days. Let me go to my Azure portal. This is where all my services are located. And if I go to right now, I'm in the process of creating the credentials or the person or the app that will impersonate to connect to our environments. So I will go to Active Directory, and then under app registrations, you would see that now I have two applications created. What I call SOD Dev SPN, the service principal for my dev environment, and another app, which is the SPN for my production environment. Basically, you can just also create your own application. You can just give it a name based on your naming convention. I'll just write the dummy text now. I will not actually create it. But basically, it's an easy process to, what I'm trying to say here is that it's an easy process to create your application. Once you have created this application, if I go back to app registrations, once you have created those applications, it will have some kind of a client secrets. So if I go to the dev environment and go to secrets, you can see that, okay, I will not show it because the value is hidden anyway. Yes. So you can see that will be some secrets that you can utilize. This you can consider this as your password. This is where you will be your credentials to the servers. But wait a little. Now that we have the SPN or the app, does it have access to the environments? How do we give it access to the environments? What is the security model? That's also part of the governance. So if you would like to limit the app access to a specific resources, you can still do that. So let me take you to my next component, which is our environments.
And I can actually add one comment
Yeah.
that I like that you created two. In theory, you could just create one and give it access both to production and the dev environment, but that's not what we want, right?
No.
We want to ensure that we can securely deploy first to the dev environment, maybe to the test, well, and in this case, into the production,
Yeah.
but we don't want to give people access to both environments with just one key. We would like to separate dev environment with the dev app, production environment with the production app.
Very good point. Exactly. We don't want our developers to have the tunnel on the two environments. It's only separation. It's only for dev. That's a very good point. Yeah, okay. So let me show you my environments actually. Right now, I have other resource groups, but those are the ones that we are concerned about is those two. I have two resource groups that will contain all my services. And as it is today, I have a dev resource group and a production resource group. This is just for demoing purposes, but typically you would actually have 3 or 4 dev, test, pilot, and prod. But as for demoing, now it's just dev and prod. So if I go to this service group, which again in our mapper diagram, I can show it here. You can consider it as a server, the resource group now, you can consider it as a server. This resource group, if I go to access control, then I will get an overview of all the users who have access to this resource group. So basically, I am, of course, the tenant admin, so I have ownership permissions, but I also gave the app that we just created, the SPN related to dev, a contributor rights. So anyone who is impersonating this app would be able to deploy, add resources as a contributor. And I can always add, manage role assignments through different. So let's say if I would like a reader, maybe I could give a production SPN a read write to dev, just in case. As an example, I will not do that, but just as an example, then I can just go and say SOD search for my production app, and then you can see that now I have it, this application. So
now we will see resources, but we'll be not able to create new resources.
Exactly. So now we are kind of creating and making the wiring of our infrastructure just in the cloud. So we created the user, we gave the user the permission to the server kind of in the cloud. This is all the wiring we are trying to do. And it's very important, as we said in the beginning, it's very important when you start a new project to think ahead of this kind of establishment. I would say DevOps should be something that's running in the DNA of running the project and not come as a later phases. So it's important to establish those wiring and infrastructure first in place and have them in place and test them along the process while you're developing. So
you're saying that we should create our environments, we should create our service connections, we should ensure that we can deploy to the dev environment, to the production environment, just a small part of our application maybe, and then when we are sure that it works, then we can start developing and adding more features to it.
Exactly. The first thing I ask about when I am assigned a new solution, what is the environments do we have? Do we have a production? What kind of platform? What is the credentials? And all that. You don't need to think about it. Of course, you need to think about it, but it should comes with small efforts in the cloud. You should just create resource groups, you create SPNs, and you don't need to think about credentials anymore in environments. You will have them established for you, and it's just simple clicks to do it, and it doesn't take much time to establish. Yes.
Sounds great.
Yeah, perfect. So if I go back to the reference diagram, now we have created the SPN, our app. We gave it access to our resources. What's missing is the system admin who will actually execute it and the packages. So that will make me jump ahead to Azure DevOps. Let's go and talk about Azure DevOps. So just as an explanation, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to establish the bridge between the two tools. We have Azure, the cloud portal, as a cloud provider, and then we have Azure DevOps, Again, terms are very important because it could be very confusing. Naming. Azure DevOps is where it contains all our packages and source control. We're trying to establish a bridge between those two tools. So we can push the package from Azure DevOps to Azure. So this bridge would utilize the SPN we just created. It will impersonate the context of the SPN we just created. How do we do that? It happens through what we called a service connection. Service connection is basically something in the settings of your tenant or your project. If you have enough permissions, you would be able to see it. If you go to service connections, then you would be able to create. I already have two established. We'll go through them, but let me take you first through the experience of creating a new service connection. When you press this button, you would get a lot of options. So basically, Azure DevOps here is trying to tell you, well, you are trying to establish a bridge to another tool or another environment. Is it Azure? Is it Docker host? Is it GitHub? There is a lot of integration with other services. What we are concerned about today is Azure Classic, is actually establishing the Azure connection to our Azure providers. So if I press next, then it will actually, let me just go back.
You need to take the resource manager.
Yeah, exactly. The Azure Resource Manager, because as we said, our resources are basically resource groups.
Yeah.
So I'll choose the Azure Resource Manager. If I click next, then I will get to couple of options. Automatic. Basically, if I choose the service principal to be automatic, it will go ahead and create the app for me and hook it up to this service connection, hook it up to Azure DevOps. The reason why I didn't do it automatically is that I like to keep my tenant neat when it comes to naming convention, and that's why I went manually to the Active Directory and created the app myself, give it the right names, give it the right access, and then I will manually edit here. So I'll choose the manual option if I have the app created. Yes.
And I think the automatic version, it also requires that you already linked your Azure Active Directory tenant with your Azure DevOps tenant.
Yes.
Otherwise, how should it know where to create
Exactly.
the service
Exactly. You
principal?
need to have the right access. You need to have the right permissions to run this wizard and to create it automatically. Of course, it doesn't. There is some security trend to it as well. Okay, so if we take the service principal manual, then it will ask me about my subscription ID, which is my Azure subscription basically. It will ask me about the name of the subscription and then the service principal ID. So if I go back here and go to the Active Directory again, let's go to the app, to the apps we just created previously. So let's take the dev SPN. You would see that when it loads, you'd see that the application have an object ID. This is the SPN. This is the service principal ID. This is the ID of the user the service connection or the bridge will impersonate. And then it will ask you for the service principal key, which again is the secret of the app. So this is Azure DevOps asking me for the username and password, kind of. What is the ID of the user? What is his secrets? So now that I would configure all this, then I would actually establish the bridge. So let's take one of the already created today for the demo. We're running out of time, so let me just show you that I already created the established the connection with the Azure Cloud. I provided it with my subscription ID, which is this name, and then I gave it the service principal ID. If I go back, it is application ID. Sorry, it's not the object ID. It is the application ID here, and then I provided it with the secret. That now I have a bridge. Those two are considered like a bridge to the two resource groups, to my two dev and prod environments we have in Azure. So every time I'm doing a deployment, I don't need to go to a specific person, ask him to log into the resource group, using his credentials, using his access to deploy the package. I can easily utilize those two bridges to push packages.
So this, in old days, we could refer to it as a service account.
Yes,
to some extent.
Exactly. Yeah.
And now basically it's important to note to say that everybody who has access to this service connection within this project can utilize it.
Exactly. That's a very good point. That's our next topic here, because wait a little. This this event, this broadcast is about segregation of duties. It's
Yes.
about governance. Now you're telling me you have established two bridges to our prod and dev production, and everyone in DevOps, Azure DevOps can start using it. As it is today, yes, you can. But as it is in the current state, yes, you can. But later on the event, I will show you how to govern and secure your service principal. It's important to note, a mental note here is that this bridge is your bottleneck. Basically, you don't have any access to your environment except through this gate, this service connection we have. So if you are able to govern the service connection, if you are able to apply special security on this service connection, then you are kind of also gating and securing your environments, because you'll know that this bridge or this credential no one can use except he has the right permissions. But first, let's test our connections first. So let me go to our resource groups, dev and prod. You see that we have a storage account here created previously. I'll just delete it. Quickly, yes, cleaning up. And meanwhile, I actually have a code. So back to the point, everything is in one place. My code is here. I'm basically have created a source code that will quickly create a storage account, which is a storage service in Azure. And I also have a pipeline that's utilizing this repo. This pipeline consists of 3 steps: building my code, deploying it to dev, and then deploying it to production. But how does it do the connection to service to Azure? If I go to the code here, you would see that in my YAML file, I'm referencing the names of the 2 service connections we just created. So now I'm actually telling the my pipeline, my release pipeline, to utilize those 2 service connections, since they are open to anyone at the moment. We'll get back to that, to deploy to Azure DevOps. So let's go ahead and run this
So
pipeline just to
basically,
see.
even while it's running, even if you have when you have some developers, they can already start utilizing it. They don't need the secret because somebody else already authorized this connection.
Yes,
They verified it. It's there. It's ready to use.
exactly. All the wiring is happening for the developers. They don't have to worry about it. And again, this shows the powers of utilizing the cloud tools. In the back in the days, you had to have a server, remote connect to that server, get your package copied to that server, and install it. Now it's just a matter of clicking the different tools if the wiring and the setup is done correctly. So yeah, this will take around 2 minutes to build and deploy. But do we have any questions in the meantime?
We don't have any questions, but we can just talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm thinking that comes actually to the. Now we said that we are setting up the service connections. We are creating a tunnel between the Azure DevOps and the Azure environment, and we would like to actually push the packages now. So now our developers, they can start developing application, and it comes to the kind of base of the DevOps principles, and hence the name Azure DevOps. So now we have actually created an environment for our developers who can start developing applications.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of course, you will limit them at some point,
Yes.
so they don't push packages to the production environment, but it should be open towards the dev environment. We don't need additional bottlenecks
No.
invented in our pipelines.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
once we are sure that our things are building
Yeah.
and eventually tested, then we can just ship them to the dev environment.
That's also one of the points here. Is like that's the whole concept of continuous integration. This event here is not about continuous integration, but we are partially touching base on it, because once as a developer, once I have done my code, I have no limitation. I can just push it straight away to dev, and using the right establishment and so on. Yes. So this is working, and there's one more thing while we're waiting I would like to show. When we started the topic, we talked also about auditing and history. Here you can see in this dashboard all the runs and who have executed those runs in which environments. So this is also very obvious. You have a clear understanding on what you're deploying and where. So yeah, now you can see that the dev environment has successfully worked. So if I refresh my resource group, you would see that now Azure DevOps have compiled my code, created a package using the service connection or the bridge, impersonating the app we just created, had access to this resource group, and actually deployed the storage account. So all the flow and all the warnings now is in place. However, there is something that's terrifying now, that once we have successfully pushed to dev, it went straight away to production.
Uh-oh. We need to somehow restrict this.
Yes. So how do we think this through? How do we enable security? So during our talk, we talked about that the service connection is actually our bottleneck, our backlog, our bridge to the environments. So now, if I can secure the usage of the production service connection, I'm sure that no one can go deploy again to our production environment. How do we do that? So let's go ahead again to our service connection and go click those three buttons. Now, a very interesting two options show on the service connection configuration. There is security, and there is the approval and checks. So let's go ahead and figure out what this is about. Let's go first to approval and checks. So here I'm presented with, let me zoom out a little maybe. Yeah, here I'm presented with different options. So basically, this is Azure DevOps telling me, okay, we can give you a gate or checks. So before you push anything or any packages through this service connection, you need to pass those gates. And the gates could be approvals. It could be that the code is coming from a specific branch. It could be that we are deploying within a specific service window, so we don't take the environments down while everyone is working on it. So there is a lot of gates that you can apply on your bridge to production. So I will go ahead and say the typical and the easy flow is we see at our customers is that there is somebody who's concerned or responsible for the production environment, and we need his signature or approval on going to production. So I will add an approval method here, and then I will choose my friend Igor. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very dangerous that you give him access to production.
No, you're fine. You will take responsibility for that. You have the powers. And here comes a very interesting option as well. I'm actually disallowing you, if I uncheck this checkbox, I'm actually disallowing you from approving your own changes. So even though you have access to approve releases to production, you don't have access to approve malicious packages that you develop yourself.
So everything that I develop will never come to production.
Unless someone else approve it. Unless I'm approving your changes. And this, one of the concepts here we are defining, segregation of duties.
Yeah.
We are ensuring that at least 4 eyes have looked the code, have looked the packages, and approved each other before going to releases.
And this is actually very important.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how good you are at whatever you're doing, we all are humans, we all do mistakes, and it's always a good idea to have somebody else to look at. Is it your code or something else? So you should not, in theory, at least if you're on a bigger project and you have the option to have a colleague to look at your code,
exactly.
They go through it and eventually approve.
So actually, we can establish this as a team. There is multiple setups. We can establish this as a team on test environment. So as a developers, if we are a team of developers, we can say that we don't approve any changes to test environment unless someone else have looked at it. That's one way to look at it. But if it is production, then we don't even give access for developers to approve it. It needs to be a release, a system admin, or someone who is responsible for production that would be added to the approvals, the gate approvals on that bridge. So exactly. You can utilize it in different ways, depends on the environment you have. So now I'm adding you, Igor, as a system admin to production. I'm disallowing you to approve your own changes.
Thank you.
And I will do that. I will create this one. So that's the first step. Then I would like to make sure that once we have set the approvals, no one goes through the back door because he have enough permissions to the service connection and change the configuration of the approvals.
Exactly. Or override the policies. That's also possible.
Override the policies. So that comes to the part of a governance. There is a lot of governance going on. So if I go to the security part here, you can see that by default, out of the box, the service connections have 2 groups added. contributors and endpoint administrators, and they have administrative rights on the service connection. What does administrative right means? That anyone who is part of those two groups can go in, add approvals, remove approvals, modify gates, and that's not what we want in production. We want to secure it and keep it locked on a specific people. So
And also change the permissions, I guess.
and change the permissions.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we have created the segregation of duties. Now we are speaking about governance, security. So I will go ahead and remove all the contributors. I don't want the contributors to be able to change that. And I'm already tenant admin, so I'm here by default. And then I will lock it down only on the endpoint administrator. Endpoint administrators are typically, in an organization, are typically the Azure DevOps tenant admins. They are the ones who have access to all the bridges and they can manage it. They are the ones who are giving the right security. So I would keep the endpoint administrators here and then remove all the contributors. No one can go in and change you as an approval or remove you or add himself as an approval. Now when I do that. So let's restrict the permissions now and save. Okay.
And it sounds like they are small things, but these things are very important, and it's important to take the decision from the beginning, actually. Who will have access to change this?
Yes.
So you suddenly don't push something to production that should actually not be in production.
Yeah, exactly. So that comes to defining the roles within the teams. Who is the system admin? Who is the one who is signing this release is good enough to go to production and responsible for it? So yeah, definitely. Okay, now that we have secured our bridge, let's try again and rerun our pipeline and see if it will go to production. That's gonna be interesting. So let's run a new pipeline. Oh, not create a new pipeline,
Yes.
sorry. Just go to my pipeline and run a new execution. And this time, I'm hoping that it will build and go to dev, and hopefully someone needs to approve releasing to production first. So let's go ahead now, and I will show you in my resource groups. I will go to production. This storage account was created yesterday. I'll just delete it for now.
So before we could deploy actually to the dev
Yeah.
and to the production,
Mhm.
and now we expect that it will stop at the production and wait for my approval.
Yes, exactly. It's expecting that. Actually, while this is running, I would like to show you some more options, which are quite interesting. So if I go to the service connection, we talked about governance and security, but there is a lot of other configuration you can also do. So if I go to security, now that you have chosen, I was in the dev, let's go to production, service connection here, and go security. Now we have limited who have access. You can also limit this bridge or service connection to be used by a specific pipelines. So this no specific source code or a specific code base that are able to access this bridge and utilize it. So let's say if you have a case where you have a lot different teams working with different environments working in the same Azure DevOps team, you can actually still segregate the permissions across those teams. So you can specifically say that this bridge or service connection is only available to the pipeline releasing my storage account.
So it's
Makes
also
sense?
adding additional security.
Yes,
basically.
more governance, and yes. So I will actually go ahead now and and do that. I will restrict the permission, and right now I only have one pipeline for demoing purposes. But if I had more, then I would have seen more. But right now I'm saying that this service connection can only be used by this pipeline. Yes, let's go back to our run. Okay, now we can see we have built and we did deploy to dev, but it didn't go to production. But why? I'm a developer, I would like to push it to production. What's going on? I see that we need someone called Igor to approve my going live to production. If I go to production, if I'm a developer and I have access, I would doubt that, but if I did had access to production as a developer, read rights, you can see that my storage account is not there. I will call Igor and ask him to approve this.
Even though you are the project admin here, and you can basically do everything in Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
You are the organization admin as well.
Yeah.
But that's not even enough, because now you decided that I should
Yes,
approve the pipeline.
exactly. So
Should I do
once,
that?
please. So what Igor now is going in and through his laptop is actually accessing my portal, and as his changes, he just approved it, and you can see that it's now instant. That you see that my pipeline now have been approved, and it says okay, checked passed, or the gate that we have configured is now passed, and now it will hopefully soon push it to production, and we can have a storage account live.
And this way we have again the traceability, right? Who
Yeah.
allowed this and what's been pushed. So we can always go back in time and see what has been released to production,
Exactly.
who approved it, why, and if needed, then we can also go back.
Yes, totally good point. I can actually now go and see who have approved going live. It's you. Do you trust me enough to push this package? I can see
Trust
that. Okay, perfect. So yes, back to your point, you can actually see the history and track what kind of signatures are applied to this package to go to production, which is again very good and secure way. Let's see if our storage account is here. It's still working on it, I guess.
On the way.
It's taking some time. Okay, we have 9 minutes left. So meanwhile, this one is deploying to production. I can show one last feature I would like to show to tell you about. If I go back and go to my approvals and checks, which is basically our gates, you can see that now we have added the approval gates, but I also said that we can add other kind of approvals. You can say that I need it to come from a specific branch, or it should invoke an Azure function. This is one of the nice features if you are actually trying to deploy to an API, but before deploying it, you need to make sure that the environment is healthy and running, for example. So you can easily ping your environments and see if they're healthy or not. But talking about branches, I can check the branch, and then I can't remember the exact syntax, to be honest, but I will try it. So if it doesn't work, don't blame me.
Feature.
I can go to my YAML file here and to this one and say, I think it was origin. I would like to something like master, something that is no, it's not like that. 1 second. Yeah, ref heads release. Yes, I got it now. So I would like to only restrict it to deploy to production if it is coming from the master branch. And what now? And now I think it's called main.
Main, yeah. I think in your case you had
In,
main, yeah.
in my branches, it's main. Yes. So I will just now restrict production to only deploy code from main. Let's jump back to our pipeline and then see what we just the gates, the new gate we applied. Okay, now production is successfully done, and now Igor have approved my storage account to production. You can see it is here. Perfect. Let's move into the new gate we just applied. Branching control. This is all live. I'm trying it now. So if it doesn't work, but I know it will work hopefully. So let's go to my repo. I think I'm ready now to merge to main. So let's see if that will work.
We can try running. Well, I don't think we have time, but we could. It could be interesting to run it again. And in theory,
Yeah.
it should not go, even though I approve it.
That's a good point. Let's try to deploy again to production from a branch that's not the main. Let's go to deploy directly from my feature branch. I believe this will fail. According to our configuration here, it will fail because production is only having a gate that it should come from the main branch. So this would be very interesting to see once the build is done.
And this is kind of, you can manage it in different ways. You can manage it on the level that we have just done. You can also do it through the definition in the YAML file, basically. So there can be many ways to achieve it. But in general, we don't actually want people to deploy something to the environments from their feature branches,
Yes.
because we are not sure that the code is stable there.
Yeah.
So we need to go through the build phase,
Yeah.
test phase, and packaging phase. And once this is done, then we actually would like to move to the dev.
And Azure DevOps comes with a lot of toolings. We are only touching base on a specific area in Azure DevOps, but there is also branching policies, there is also packaging policies and other kind of stuff. And they all complement each other. So back to your point, we can easily utilize Azure DevOps to apply branching policies so that you cannot merge to main unless someone have code reviewed your changes. So I'm as a developer, I'm working in my feature branch, I'm fine, I'm deploying to dev environment, but in order for me to push it and release it to production, I need to merge to main And before I can do that, the Azure DevOps will enforce someone else to look into my code. So we have two types of approvals now. We have a developer who is looking into the code, reviewing the code, and then once it's have been merged to main, then we have another guy who is a system admin approving the package to go to the dev environment. So now if you look into my pipeline, it is expected failure. Yay. You can see that now it's telling me, yes, you're trying to push, but one of the gates have failed. Let's have a look. What did I do? Branching control failed. So this is basically saying, Azure DevOps saying, now you're trying to push a package from a feature branch. It needs to come from DevOps. Just to wrap it up quickly, we talked about on-premise, all the way forking. We talked about one-to-one mapper between the cloud and how we establish the wiring. Once we have established the wiring, bottlenecks, and bridges, we talked about how do we add more gates and easily establish an approval process. And we also talked about how do we limit it on a specific people who can securely manage it and a specific pipelines. So yeah, I hope I have 4 minutes left, so I don't know if there's any more to.
Should we move it to the main branch now, and just to show that actually it will pass the check?
Let's do that. I don't know if we have enough time, but let's.
You can
it's a good
start
point.
and let's see.
It's a good point.
There are some questions actually.
Yeah.
I think.
We can answer the question while doing a pull request quickly.
Ola asks, is it possible to share your YAML file? Would like to, they would like to have some experience with staged pipelines.
If it is possible to use YAML pipelines.
No, if it would be possible to share your YAML pipeline.
With across different repos or different teams?
No, with the person asking a question.
Oh yeah, sure. I can definitely. Let's if I can get your if you send us your email, I will provide you with a source code for the entire setup. Absolutely, no problem. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm quickly creating a new go live pull request.
And there's an advertisement I have on GitHub account with all the
the YAMLs, okay.
the YAMLs
So
and the
even-
multi-staged
even
and
better.
documentation.
Even better.
So send us an email and we will send you a link.
Perfect. So now I'm completing my merge to main. I do squash merge. I don't want to delete my feature branch. And again, based on policies, I could have enforced somebody to review me. I couldn't have completed this pull request before somebody to review me, my code. But having said that, now I am
Do it
hopefully
for time constraints and the demo
exactly.
purpose. We skip some of the practices.
Exactly.
But
But you can see now that the code is in the main branch. It have been merged. Exactly. I agree. We are running out of time, so I will quickly. That automatically, speaking of continuous integration, automatically triggered a new deployment. And that would do the build. And what I'm expecting now is that the first gate would be successful because we are running in the main. And then it will ask you again to approve it. So let's wait a little.
let's wait.
Yeah. So we have your own GitHub repo with all the YAML.
Oh, yes.
Nice, nice.
It's a bit not outdated, but it's been a while since I set it up. But it should still work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, maybe?
Yeah. If you're a developer, you're used to waiting for build pipelines, I guess. So
Yeah. but actually, if
we are lucky, it only takes 2 minutes. So
if you have any questions regarding the multi-staged pipelines, and if there is any interest, we would love share our knowledge. I guess.
We can arrange a new session actually based on the if please send us other areas in Azure DevOps that you would like to touch base on, or even Azure solutions. I'm actually planning to speak about different sessions in relation to Azure. So we have coming up session about Azure VNet, but more will be published later. Yes, if I go now to this pipeline, you would see that it have actually passed the branch control and now waiting.
So now it's only me.
Igor. Yeah, and
And
Igor,
now
I guess
will
now
approve it,
is approving it.
and we are good to go.
So
I think
refreshing
it will run now.
And 2 checks passed, and our changes will go live. I think this wraps it up. It's a big topic. We tried to just explain it quickly and easy in a 45 minutes. But of course, we would be happy, more than happy, if you have more questions or anything we can help with, we would love that.
Yeah. You can drop us an email. I guess Azure DevOps, Azure CI/CD pipelines. We are big fans of that, and we would be
definitely
ready and love to help.
It's a pleasure to work with this tool every day. I would say it's one of my passions, so it's perfect. Yes.
Thank you for joining today.
Yeah.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.